And the speech is particularly designed so that they will get to learn the significance of today's event, the commemoration of the 1860 settlers. I have ties with Merebank which go back not only to my childhood, but in the years following, both in relation to my political connection with many actors from this area, and actually a resident following my marriage in 1965 to a family in Dubri, as it was pointed out by the international in Durban. Let me at the outset congratulate our very own Ivan Pillay on his vindication by the highest court in the land in his involvement in the so-called SARS rogue unit. The alleged allegation against him was a painful ordeal and a crying shame which implicated somebody we all know well and somebody whom I work for, Praveen Gordon. They've all been totally vindicated. But no amount of monetary compensation can make up for the initial trauma. Regrettably, time constraints dictate that I deliver a much shorter address than the one I have chosen. The election of Rishi Sunak as the new British Prime Minister to succeed Boris Johnson and the controversy surrounding it is not something we can ignore. Day-to-day conversation ranges from whether Rishi Sunak is British and native of Britain, a settler of English or Asian extraction, and so on, including whether of Hindu heritage. And this had widespread media and social coverage, which all goes to show how preoccupied we are with the compartmentalizing of people according to race, color, religion, national origin, or whatever. Coincidentally, just about the time when Rishi Sunak achieved the unthinkable, I was fortunate to have been invited to a colloquium at which the question posed was whether, in relation to the descendants of Indian extraction who eventually settled in Africa, in countries whether in Uganda, Kenya, Mauritius, South Africa, and the Caribbean, following indenture, are considered as native or settler. In other words, are we all here present who know no other homeland consider ourselves natives or settlers? I have little doubt that nearly all of us will acknowledge that we are of Indian extraction, only to choose of Asian extraction. The conversation following the discussion, which was led by Dr. Keshavji, a recipient of the Gandhi Peace Award, I for one do not deny my Asian or Indian or Hindu roots. I wear that on my sleeve with pride, as you can see here by the red string on my right hand. And the name I bear, which was given to me as long ago as 1936, is not what you all know me by, but by the name Bharat. And that name was given to me by my dad's elder sister. And it means son or lord of India. And which is remarkable in the sense, in more ways than one. Because when I was elevated to become a judge, I was before a court for the first time, which was replete with white advocates, senior counsel, and members of the bar. At that time, there were not many white Indian judges of color. And believe it or not, by virtue of practice, they all had to address me as my lord. Now, I for one recall in anger typecast as a settler or foreigner. When I travel abroad, wherever it be, I answer South African to the invariable question which appears on an immigration form on the question of nationality. Being of third Indian generation of Indian extraction, I consider myself a native South African, never Indian, in answer to that specific question. And I'm sure all of you would have gone through a similar experience. When you're asked your nationality, you say South African. I do not consider myself a settler, neither did my parents at any stage. I am as native a South African as any. This reminded me of an exchange which famous Trinidadian West Indian author, some of you might have read about him, V.S. Naipaul, had with an Englishman on one of his travels to England. After the formalities of the introduction, Naipaul was asked about his nationality, to which he promptly responded, I am a Trinidadian. Trinidadian. And the response from the inquirer was, but you look Indian. Similarly, if you were asked the question of what nationality you are, the ignorant will say, but don't look South African, you look very Indian. I would imagine that if Rishi Sunak were to be asked his nationality, I'm quite certain that he would unhesitatingly answer British. And depending on who asked the question, the retort could well be, but you look Indian. Time does not permit me to refer to the plethora of press, radio, television, and social media comment on what is perceived as an anomaly. The election of a man of Indian, Hindu, or Asiatic extraction, if you like, being elected by his party, Conservative Party to boot, as Prime Minister of the country, which was in the main responsible for the concept of indentured. I was reading a social media post, and I was quite shocked by what I read. It was by a person by the name of Sunny Morgan, who I'm not sure whether I know, but it was raised the same quizzical question of who am I, whether I'm an Indian, a settler, or a native of African origin. When I was invited to be the keynote speaker of today's memorial event, I was very generously and somewhat flatteringly told, and I quote, "We look forward to listening to your wealth of knowledge of the life and experiences of our forebears." It's very important that especially the younger people get to know this, because it's all very well celebrating, singing and dancing and to commemorate the event. But you have to know why we commemorate the event. I am afraid that due to time constraint, I want to share only personally with you just one or two insofar as it is related to what I call the struggle. Some hair-raising moments and some amusing escapades. In 1958, I was part of a student delegation to New Delhi in India, where Pandit Nehru was the first Prime Minister. And I was accompanied to that conference by a person named, I don't know how many of you studied history, well, his name was Joshua Nkomo, a political ally of Zimbabwe's Prime Minister Mugabe. And I was quite amused that when we were at the hotel that evening after having met the Prime Minister Nehru, and he says to me, he says, you know, I've been all over the world, but I've never seen so many beautiful women as I've seen in India. So that makes you feel a bit tough about really being Indian. Like nearly all entering old age, I'm now 86, going on to be 87. We only know too well the fallibility of memory. The widely held view is that there is a huge gap between what is called short-term and long-term memory. Ask me what I had for lunch yesterday, I will with great difficulty not remember. But ask me something about my early years, and I will, like to respond in a flash. About old age, rather amusingly, I have people who are close to my age or who are my age presently here. I could sit down on a chair to put on my pants or lean against the wall to put on my pants. And it must come as no surprise to most of you that with the passing of veteran activist Swami Gaundan, I remain the last and only surviving member of Dr. Monty Naika's 1961 executive of the Natal Indian Congress. The only survivor. I can therefore count myself as fortunate to have made it thus far, to celebrate this occasion with you and to commemorate. And importantly for young people, please remember the significance of this day. Remember your duty as to be an active citizen. I'm not asking you to join a political party, but do not sit back and see suffering around you and see prejudice around you. Do something about it. As long ago as the late 1950s, one of the earliest women activists, well-known firebrand of the struggle, and way ahead of the times, was Dr. K. Gunnan. Some of you would have heard of her. A contemporary of Dr. Naika and Dr. Yusuf Dadu, with whom I had the pleasure of working with. She wrote a book called The Coolie Doctor, and it raised a lot of controversy at the time. Unfortunately, the book is out of print, but it's something, if ever you are able to lay your hands on, you should read that book, and it's called The Coolie Doctor. A book startlingly similar in title. It's called, and I quote, Coolie Woman, The Odyssey of Adventure, Indentured, is the one by one Gyatra Bahadur, a Harvard-educated journalist who goes into great lengths to trace the history of her great-grandmother, who was part of the Coolie labor sent to the Caribbean, mind you, by the British on indenture, to work on the sugar plantations there. No difference as if some of our forebears to work on the plantations here in Madras. Interestingly, the earliest case of indenture go back to the Caribbean in about the mid-1830s, and we arrived here in the 1860s. And I will just, for the sake of interest, refer to some of the extracts from a book. Barbu further says in the book, in relation to the use of the word coolie, to which a lot of us would take offense. She says, and I quote, coolie comes from the Tamil word coolie, meaning wages or hire. It was first used by Portuguese captains and merchants at the beginning of the 16th century in relation to those who carried loads of goods to the ships. And gradually the word took on the broader meaning someone paid to do menial work. Babu, in effect, to face her lineage, she then emigrated to the United States. Discovered that her great-grandmother had quit her village in India for the Caribbean. The very summer that she crossed the Atlantic, a debate was raised in India over a law intended to keep married women from deserting their homes for the colonies. No woman could emigrate without her husband's permission. If officials found she was lying, she could be detained for up to 10 days in order to check whether she was genuinely a widow or single. White officials in charge of clearing people for indenture often complained that they could not muster enough women for indenture. No ship could sail from India unless there were 40 women for every 100 men among the coolies. Reading through some passages in the book by Barbu, I learned that the concept of indenture started as early as 1835. The first probably being to the Caribbean, which we now all refer to as the West Indies. We've all heard the word coolie used in relation to many, or at least in relation to some of us here present. Babu, who wrote that book that I was referring to, observed that the word coolie has always been seen as so loaded a word that in 1956, Trinidad's future Prime Minister, Eric Williams, called upon all Trinidadians to reject the word as contemptuous, which we also do so at present in this country. More surprisingly for me, and that is why I really plead on our younger generation to read the history of the invention. It's all very well celebrating the occasion with sense, dance, music, and so on. But remember our roots and the struggles of those who came before us. A poet, Guyanese poet by the name of Rajkumari Singh, issued a call, and she said, proclaim the word, identify with the word, I am a coolie. There was no shame in origins as indentured laborers. She goes on to insist that the word must not be left to die, buried and forgotten in the past. It must be given a new lease of life. All that they did and we are doing, and our progeny will do, must be stamped with the name Coolie, lest posterity accuse of not venerating of our ancestors. And that's what we are here to do. There were others from the Caribbean who work at similar sentiments. For example, prominent British writer David Dabydeen, born and raised in Guyana, again in the Caribbean, for West Indies before us, and he authored poems titled Coolie Odyssey, Coolie Mother, and so on. A further example is one that goes back to the 1900s, when poet Karl Poraboli of Mauritius began to formulate the principles of a movement called Coolitude, a cousin of negritude, that aims to be the basis of a broad group of people scattered across the globe who have roots in Indian indenture. Bahadur rightly comments, and I'm sure most of you would believe me living in this country, that coolie word may bear a jagged edge like a broken bottle, which no doubt many have experienced. Much depends on who is using it, the word, and why. In an effort to explain the use of the word, Bahadur says, I have chosen, and I quote, I have chosen to employ it because it is true to my subject. My great-grandmother was a high-caste Hindu. That is a fact. But she left India as a coolie, and that is also a fact. The first time that it was referred in relation to me, is at a place not far from here. It was at the security branch headquarters here in Wentworth, a police station and the old Wentworth Magistrates Court used to be. I was detained together with, the late Ibrahim, and K. Munsami. And I was taken into a room for questioning for attending an illegal gathering on the case of which has made the law books on the question of what amounts to common purpose when bad people enter a gathering, attend a gathering. And the white policeman, I've just lost his name now, but I don't know, I'll remember it for the rest of my life. It was said to me, I was an article clerk at the time, not quite qualified as an attorney. He said, you are a coolie supporter of the ANC. That was the first direct reference to me as a coolie. And it still grieves me to this day. Much has been written on Indian indenture as it relates to their arrival in South Africa in November of 1860 on board the SS Truro, as you know, and the SS Belvedere. Their treatment being akin to slavery, the difficulty women in particular face at the hands of their white bosses and overseers, at the hands of the crew of the ships that carried them to unknown lands, even abused at the hands of fellow passengers on the ships. Among the many who have written on the subject, as you know, are people like Ghulam Bhai, Ashwin Desai, Fatima Mir, Leti Kumi Naidu, Sarvan Naidu, Narayan Ganesh, and so on. Far many to recall. Like most of you, I want to know more about my forebears. How and when they arrived in South Africa, their livelihood, the difficulties they faced, their progress from the days of invention, and how did it come about, as in my case for instance, their progeny, that's me, rose to become a lawyer and eventually elevated to the judiciary by no less a person than our former President Nelson Mandela. How did it come about? That is the story of indenture. There is something which we all share in common, and that is wanting to know about our ancestry. And I think all of you, and especially the young, should make a point of trying to find out. Because just a day or two on social media, I read the plaintive cry of one lady I don't know at all, called Mira Hussein. And it read, "Can someone please help me trace my grandparents?" And she attaches a copy of their marriage certificate, which she happened to stumble upon. And if some of you, well, at least they're over 50, if you look at their old marriage certificates and that of your parents and grandparents, you will see a series of numbers there, and which will eventually take you to the ship's list of people that arrived at the time. What I discovered in relation to mine, especially on my paternal and maternal side, was very intriguing and puzzling. On the maternal side, documents show that my grandfather was born in a place, not in India, but in a place called Black River in Mauritius. And arrived here in South Africa as a young married man at the age of 17 in 1904. I did not know that history shows that Mauritius was at some time used by the British as a penal colony for prisoners from India. The document, which is dated 1904, shows that his residence was at 153 Angeli Road, Durban. It's as far as I got to know of my maternal grandfather. My great-grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, her roots were traced by my aunt, and some of you may know her. This was the late Mrs. Merebank Dixon Pillay, the spiritual head of the Tamil Madras and of the Truro, to a village called Ozumangalam in South India. However, rather intriguing is that on my parental side, my great-grandfather, my paternal side, who arrived separately on two ships, and all of you, and especially of the young, may only have heard of the Truro and what's the other ship? The Truro and the other ship that now are popular. But there were ships called the Mars and the Edmondsbury, for instance, which sailed from Madras to Chennai. My paternal great-grandfather orders it near here, didn't come to work on the sugar cane, but on the railways, because India had many Indians working on the British railways, which they helped establish in India during their reign there. As pointed out earlier, I will in a few months be turning 87. And what I intended to do, in keeping with what I think is expected of me, some of my life's experiences, not only as a descendant, but the South African engaged at some level in the fight against apartheid, the establishment of the new order, and then share with you briefly as time permits what is currently engaging the minds of just about everyone. And especially it should be engaging the mind of the youth of today. The crucial answer to the question, where are we now as a nation? Is it time to press the reset button, as J.J. Kabbalah thinks should be done in his usually entertaining TV program called J.J.'s Rant? Here then, briefly, for what is worth, my humble view, in very brief outline, is what could form or be part of the reset button. We have to press the reset button because things, as most of you will agree, have gone terribly wrong. I happen to have served on the electoral court as a judge for almost 10 years. And for years since retirement, I've called for a relook at our electoral system, citing some of the recommendations of the Van Zyl Commission report, which surprisingly was set up by former President Thabo Mbeki. Now, even at that time, he obviously realized that the time had come for us to look at the electoral system and the whole question of proportional representation. Those reforms that are now before Parliament, and some of you would have read about it, allow for independent candidates to contest elections. But it has flaws, which are, in my view, skewed in favor of party candidates. Those of you who are okay with political issues will remember that we vote for a party, and there's always this question of accountability. Who are these people accountable for? Has anybody from Parliament ever come to you and said, look, what is your problem? And it all revolves the question of accountability. And it's best if you know and go to the person who you chose to represent you. There was a time when people in Parliament were allowed constituency allowances. That came and went. I would ask them, as part of my recommendation, to scrap cadre deployment, professionalize the civil service, ensure that those contesting local government elections possess a minimum or rudimentary knowledge of reading and understanding of meeting procedure, able to read and understand minutes of meetings, matters arising, understanding tenders, contract implications, and compliance with terms and conditions, progress payments, and so on. I would also urge the scrapping of provincial government. The saving to the fiscus could be enormous. Devise some other watchdog institution to ensure good governance and service delivery at local and municipal level. Consider, for instance, the appointment of provincial administrators or directors general in each of the provinces to supervise local government. Move Parliament to either Pretoria or Cape Town. The savings to the taxpayer would be mind-boggling. For example, ministerial homes in Pretoria and in Cape Town, maintenance thereof, travel, luxury motor vehicle, security, and so on and so on. The list is not exhaustive. And finally, I would relook the appointment of deputy ministers. They are at most an expensive luxury and open to jobs for power, though I must concede necessary in certain portfolios. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me. I do not want to take up much of your time. I do hope, if anything, I've left you with some food for thought. Thank you.